Hello, welcome to Transform Your Workplace. This is a podcast where we explore ideas and innovations that are shaping the future of work. If you're passionate about creating healthier, more productive, and more human-centered workplaces, you're in the right place. Today's episode is a big one, especially if you're trying to make sense of what AI means for your people, your processes, and your workplace culture. But before we get into that, I want to give a quick shout out to Xenium HR, the sponsor of this show. If you're looking for a partner to help you offload the complexity of HR and payroll, look no further. At Xenium, we help organizations thrive with a full-service HR and payroll solution that covers compliance, benefits, employee relations, and so much more. It's like having a full HR department without the overhead. Check out what we do at xeniumhr.com. Now, my guest today is Daniel Strode, author, global HR leader, and one of the most insightful thinkers I know when it comes to how technology and culture intersect. This is Dan's second time on the show, and let me tell you, he brought a lot of great stuff to this conversation. In this episode, we dive deep into the real-world impact of AI on HR, from recruiting and data analytics to employee experience and organizational policy. Dan breaks down his 5P model for responsible and effective AI integration, including why recruitment and engagement analytics are ripe for transformation, how policy and governance need to evolve fast, what it takes to build a culture where AI complements, not replaces our humanity, and how to upskill your people to confidently use AI in their roles. Stick around till the end. We get into some game-changing ideas about how AI can actually enhance workplace relationships and drive deeper connection, not just efficiency. All right, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Daniel Strode. Dan, it is a pleasure to have you back on the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Brandon, and thanks for having me back. Obviously, something went right the first time.
It did. And then you approached me again with a conversation about AI, and I cannot say no to that. I've been having conversations about AI, and I think a lot of people are predicting what's next. And I think you're in the work and you're seeing how it's really transforming HR. And I'm curious from your perspective, your vantage point, like at a high level, which areas of HR do you think are going to be most impacted by artificial intelligence?
Yeah, great question. I think at the moment, what I'm seeing out there in the market is recruitment being really, really ripe for the use of AI, and also data analytics as well. So employee engagement, surveys, those kind of things. And those two naturally have lent themselves to AI use because they're data intensive, they're time consuming processes for people to be involved in. And we found ways and case studies to already make some changes and some improvements in the way we do HR with technology.
How have you been using it personally?
Yeah, personally for me, I mean, I'm a power user of AI. I would say I'm probably in the strategic level. So I love using it as a partner, a strategic thinking partner, bouncing off ideas, trying to, learn new concepts with it, develop products and services in tandem with it. So really mastering the art of prompting, I would say, knowing all the little hints and tips, hints and tricks that you can do, and really also thinking about what is the benefit a machine can bring to my work and what is the benefit I can bring to it, and knowing that human plus machine is much more powerful than just human alone or machine alone, but you have to get it right in terms of the blend and the type you're using it for.
So people like you and I, we've adopted these technologies. I think I'm really excited about it. I was like geeking out on my phone last night with some of the new generative image stuff that ChatGPT, OpenAI came out with, and just incredible stuff. I'm like blown away by some of it. And some of it's just me playing around, but there are some serious use cases that I've found in my work. Do you find the HR professionals that you've talked to, or even peeked inside of an organization and seen how they're operating, are they adopting these as fast as you would like to see that?
Yeah, I think probably the world and the industry is not adopting as fast as I could have imagined. And that's probably because most people are not power users in their personal or work lives themselves. So they're not pushing that inside companies. And the interesting thing is, even if we take Europe as the example, 50% of adults of working age have used ChatGPT, for example. But actually, half of those, again, have only used it once because
Wow.
they used it like Google and they didn't have a good result. So,
Yeah.
25% using it on a regular basis is quite low. And you see
Mhm.
more or less the same in the companies. You see probably 40% of companies having an AI use case. And actually, again, half of that, so 20% of the total, have got something live, and the other 20% have got something in pilot. So we're not really there with penetration, I would say.
Yeah, and I'm curious because like at the individual level, it's easier to adopt these things. Like you and I can just sign up for ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or one of these tools, start using it and figure out use cases. At the organizational level, it's a lot harder because it requires probably policy, strategy of the organizations you're talking to. What are they doing as far as adopting some sort of policy strategy? Like, are you having those kinds of conversations?
Yeah, so I typically approach companies with what I call the 5P model.
Yeah.
And the idea behind this is that actually we can look at AI through three main use cases. So the first being process enhancement, the second, personalization and experience, and the third, predictive insight and data analysis. But the real crux of the model is policy and governance, which is the fourth pillar, and then people and culture transformation being the fifth pillar. And those two are the most important pillars because without a digital mindset, without a mindset of embracing technology and culturally having that muscle, nothing happens. But then, even more important is the policy and the governance that goes around it, especially for HR professionals, because they are using private and personal data, and you need to do certain things in that regard.
Last fall, I did a talk with within our HR team. We about 40 HR consultants, and there were some others that came to the session. It was like their strategic offsite, and they had me do a talk on AI. It's about 90 minutes long, and here I am, like totally geeking out and talking about how amazing it is and why we need to adopt fast. And I'm showing them all these cool use cases, and I think I got people really excited. But we hadn't like stopped and thought about the governance and the policy side of it, and a lot of people were raising alarms about it. Is like, well, what can we do? Like, what are we doing with the information? And I was sort of like, okay, we need to take a step back. Do you find that the organizations are doing that same thing where it's like, we're all excited about it, we want to jump in, but we haven't really thought about the policy side?
Yeah, completely. And I mean, in Europe, where I do most of my work, there's an act called the EU AI Act, and it comes into force in August 2026. But here, the act says you need to use AI in a fair, responsible, transparent, risk-free, bias-free basis. And of course, if you're using it in an HR function and you're doing recruitment with that, you're making decisions on people's promotion based upon what the AI says, you better be paying attention to this. And the UK and the US have similar legislation, and I think more's coming down the pipe. So typically, what I say to people is you need to think on 4 or 5 blocks when it comes to your policy. The first is really auditing the AI that you have for bias, i.e., making sure that everything's fair and you understand what it's doing and why the outcomes are as they are. And then I think you do need an AI ethics and transparency policy in the company so that not only you're saying as a company, this is how we're going to use AI, but employees or job seekers can say, now I understand what you're doing with my data. And then I think you need to also have some training on compliance for the HR teams. The HR teams are the users, they need a base level of education around compliance. And then I think the fourth and fifth ideas I have here is really setting up an AI governance committee. So people from the business being able to give their thoughts and their perspectives on the AI use cases. Again, having more conversation and making things fair, open, honest, transparent is always a good thing. And then the final thing I counsel people to do is really create a catalog of all of your technology because most functions are very siloed. Most companies don't know what they have. And that, of course, exposes you to risk. So really know what you have as a baseline as well.
I'm so glad you said that. That was going to be my next question and thought was, So I'm in a marketing function. I told you, like, I run a marketing function inside of an HR and payroll company. So it makes me kind of unique in the sense that, like, I do marketing, I geek out on the technology side, but I am close enough to the HR side and, obviously run this HR podcast. A lot of the tools I use, Adobe Suite, I use a tool called Descript. All of these tools have AI now embedded into some of the tools. So some of them are just like, one day I open up the tool and an update happens and boom, I've got generative AI built into the platform. So I'm sort of inherited some of these tools without really knowing. Then there's other people who, and I use like, ChatGPT and some of these other ones where I know it's AI and I've adopted these. Do you find that HR people are running into that same situation where they have this tech stack and then one day they open it up and it's like, now it's powered by AI or machine learning or something like that without clearly knowing what they have?
Completely. And I mean, most can't turn it off even if they wanted to. So companies, they're pushing updates and you've no choice. So if you're thinking about employee engagement, if you take any of the top 10 listening platforms, all of them are using natural language processing and a form of AI there for pattern recognition or speech recognition and those kind of things. So whether you're conscious of it or not is another question. I can also turn my mind to recruitment. If you look at the top 10 softwares in recruitment, they're all using a version of AI for screening CVs and so on and so forth. So for me, that cataloging piece and then doing the work to understand, okay, what is happening in this process? Is there any opportunity for bias to be in this process? Is important because it's not on the software vendor to make safe. It's your responsibility to make sure you're using it in a safe way. And the vendors typically, as is their right, as is the contractual agreement, will say, we're implementing the AI in a fair and just way, and the user has to be responsible for the actions that they take with it and the decisions they make. So we can't offload the risk either. We need to be aware of that.
Yeah. I know it's so easy to get hung up on the risk and the policy side. And when I think about inside of an organization, I think people want these tools. I think not only in their own work, but I think from an employee experience standpoint, they really want to start using these tools. And the reason why is because it's in every part of our life at home. It's like your Netflix account. It's like feeding you content in which it knows that you want. Amazon, it's finding products that you want. Like, it's in every part of our lives. So why wouldn't it be at work and some of our people practices, right? Are you finding that as well?
Yeah, and it seems kind of backwards when you say it like that, because why would you not do that? So imagine I tell you, you've got a blindfold on and I say, Brandon, I found a technology that makes you twice as productive and gets you better outcomes. Do you want to use it? I'm sure you would say yes, not knowing what it was. And I think that's the same with AI. We are all aware that the thing can do hallucinations. We're all aware that it can make mistakes and have problems. But actually, the question is, what type of work are you doing with that? So if you look at humans, we all make mistakes as well. We all have hallucinations as well. We might not call them hallucinations, but if we call AI hallucinations then so do we. So I guess the point is here, you need to fact check. You need to know how to use the machine. You need to know how to interrogate the data and the outputs. But people do want it. And I always equate the idea of AI to like a maths test, because many people ask me, but should I be using AI? And I say, well, you tell me, because do you use a calculator to do calculations? And they say, yeah, I do. And I say, well, it's more or less the same thing. Just because you use the AI or a calculator does not let you off the hook from the outcomes that it produces. So if I go to a maths test, I need to know the fundamentals. In life, I need to know how to read and write, and I need to know basic numerical things. Then I use the calculator to help me. It gives me an answer, but the question is, what do I do with that answer? And that's the human element to this. The machine will always make us answers or give us recommendations, but we have to do the change management. We have to do the cultural change, the behavioral change. And that's the role of HR, and that's the role of people, not the machine.
Yeah. There's two ways in which I've used to get like the output I'm looking for. And one is like to feed it so much context that like, which I already know, to get a better output. And the other is to like use it sort of as an assistant, and get to like 75% and then use my critical thinking skills to get it to the finish line. One's like backwards than the other. And it's like, I don't know if you're coaching people to use it like that or if you do as well, but I'm curious, like if you could talk to the individual who's listening to this podcast right now and to give them some sort of advice to get the best outcome possible. What's that methodology?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of research written on this, and we now know about one-shot prompting, two-shot prompting, no-shot prompting, all sorts of different types of prompts. But the key for me is really, number one is to get hands-on and just play with it and experiment. Because if you're not there experimenting, then you'll never know. If you didn't try last night the new GPT function of image creation, you wouldn't know it's there, and you wouldn't, have that opportunity to use it in the workplace. So I think experiment is the baseline. But then when I think about how to counsel people, what I say to people is, I say, let's build step by step. So let's go through a matrix or a pyramid of incremental use cases. And let's start with the basic use case, which is, you are my personal assistant. So you may ask it questions like, okay, can you find me some data and some research on the average salary for a manufacturing plant worker in Detroit? And you have a basic personal assistant. But then you may go up the levels all the way through to strategic advisor, which is how I use it. And here I'm doing exactly as you say. Can we try and work on something that's 50, 75% of the way there? And then I apply my human intelligence to it. Or the voice functionality is really great for having that conversation and bouncing ideas off. You can say, and I always like to say, whenever you start your prompt, make sure you tell the large language model who it is. So please act as a human resources expert, or please act as Brandon Laws. And then you will have an answer that's befitting of Brandon or a human resources expert. And I think that's also important for framing the discussion.
When you think of the organizations who are adopting AI, the conversations you've had at the strategy level, are they adopting existing tools in the HR space for their people operations, or are they building their own on top of something?
So I think, most of them are using the large language models that are out there. So if we look at ChatGPT and so on, they're using those as the base layer. But many of them are tweaking them, should I say. So if we look at chatbots, and that's a big example actually in human resources. So the use of chatbots either to onboard employees and give them an introduction to the company, or the use of chatbots for handling the first line of employee queries in a self-service manner. Most companies, if they have the capability and scale, are creating their own models, but they're using publicly available LLMs on the back end of that. So that's what I'm seeing. And then I'm seeing most companies just taking off the shelf software. So if that's for surveys, if that's for recruiting, if that's for marketing, it's off the shelf and the functionality is built in. And to your point, maybe they know it's AI or maybe they don't. There are very few companies building their own models right now, I would say.
Right. Most people don't have a department of engineers to build a brand new tool. So yeah, it's like they adopt a tool and it has AI capabilities at some level. I'll give you a use case. So about 2 years ago, I looked for a knowledge-based system for our organization. I looked at a bunch of different ones, a lot of good ones out there. I ended up settling on one called Guru for our organization, went through the implementation of it, got all of our, not all, but what they call cards. They're like help articles, knowledge-based information. And then at some point after we implemented it, they rolled out this AI feature for answers. You can ask it a question and then it gives you the answer back, and it like basically scans the entire database. I mean, this is the kind of stuff we're talking about where we used to like hunt for stuff. This is why we went to a knowledge base. We were hunting for stuff through our servers and emails, and people are looking for files and attachments and information. This is literally at the tip of your fingers now, and everybody's saving so much time. They're so much happier. They're focusing on the right kind of work now, whereas I'm not hunting for a file for 30 minutes. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that's transformational. It's so simple, but AI can do this, right, Dan?
Completely. And that's probably the other emerging use case in HR is how can we put all of our company information into a data lake repository, ensuring that it's good quality data, of course, and then be able to do something with that data or insight. And that can be exactly as you say, documentation, minutes of meetings, whatever that is, company presentations, and so on and so forth. And I think not having to go through and search that information is really powerful. And, I've written a couple of books and I put those into the AI and I said, here, make me a container with my writing in there. Maybe my publisher's going to tell me off. But anyway, I put them in the container and now the thing will just answer questions based only upon that knowledge that's there. And I find that great because I'm not saying anyone would want to talk to me, but now if I want to talk to myself, I can. And it will give me very, very accurate answers as if I was speaking to myself. And I think that's really great.
Mm-hmm. Earlier, when you talk about the 5 Ps, I want to hone in on the people and culture transformation P. What areas of that do you think are going to be most impacted by AI or like in a transformational way? Like, what do you think is possible with that?
Probably 3 main layers going on here. So I would think for the human resources function, I'm starting to see a shift and starting to see them change operating models, which is normal. You need to change your structure in response to emerging technology. And I would say I'm seeing perhaps a strategic HR level, so business partners and centers of excellence, people grouping in those areas. So that could be your culture and transformation expert, it could be your payroll expert, it could be people who have deep expertise on certain things. Sitting in the middle, underneath the strategic layer, is like a self-service layer. So this is technology that's at the service of your users in the company. And then underneath that is what I would say is transactional HR. So teams doing transactional things. That could be payroll processing, whatever you haven't been able to automate fully, and doing that. So I think first is the operating model for HR. And then the HR skills, which is really aligned to that. I think we're seeing a shift already to more data mastery, more people with storytelling skills, more people focused on employee experience and rolling out and doing change management. I think they're all really, really important. So HR with one transformation. And then I would say the whole organization has to do a transformation. So there has to be a basic level of AI literacy in the whole company now, because we're asking people to use new tools, think in new ways, adopt a coworker, which is a machine alongside them, and that base level needs to be there. And then the third way I look at it is through the leadership level. So really, who has a cyborg mindset in the company? And the leaders need that mindset. So to say you're a machine and a human working side by side, the leaders need to be talking about AI daily. They need to be building teams which are half digital and half human. They need to be able to lead in that environment. They need to ensure there's trust in the AI across the company. They need to have the mindset of exploring new technology all the time. So I think if you look at it through those lenses of HR having to change their operating model and skills, the middle layer of the company having a basic literacy, and then the leadership layer having a cyborg mindset, you typically are going to want to pull those 3 levers. Otherwise, I think the people and culture transformation will probably not be a success.
Dan, I like to think I'm pretty open-minded about a lot of different things. And I remember months ago, I was at a party and I was talking to my best friend's wife, who's an HR executive. And I was like totally geeking out on AI stuff. I'm like, here's how I'm using it. Here's how I think it can be transformational. And she kind of looked at me and she's like, yeah, that's really cool. Do you think we'll be less human as an organization as a result of it? And that kind of stopped me in my tracks a little bit, because I'm like, I can see a world in which we adopt all these things, we get everybody using them. But just like social media did to us a decade plus ago, even though we're connected, we're a little bit more separate than we were, and disconnected, quite frankly. What do you see? Do you see any downsides to the culture when adopting all these tools?
Yeah, I mean, my gut reaction, and it's the strongest reaction I have, is to say, well, did that happen when the internet came out? Because that's probably the closest transformation that we've had that's similar, although I do think this is much more severe in the sense of the change curve is much faster.
It's probably more like electricity was.
Yeah, exactly. So, did electricity make us less human? I'm not sure, but definitely there's advantages and disadvantages. And I'd probably look at this like the question is really a polarity. So there's no right or wrong answer. And I think there's positives and negatives on both sides. And if I look for the good of this, which I think you have to, because if you don't, you say machines are going to take over, and that's clearly the bad. If you look at the good and say, this means we don't need to spend so much time on processes or intensive manual things, and we can spend more time storytelling. We can spend more time knowing people on a one-to-one level. We can spend more time thinking about the experience employees have. We need to do massive amounts of change management. We need to know the business so we're really up to date with the goings on. We need to learn about technology and be savvy about technology. I think the opportunities for being human are really massive. And potentially we can find ourselves, if we look through that positive mindset, of being more human than where we are now. However, you need to be intent about that. You need to really spend time on that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I think that we can actually spend more time connecting. There's some tools that I was learning about that, like, it understand, like maybe in an organization, we might have a profile of our tendencies and our interests, and it basically knows everything about us. And like right before you hop into a meeting, it might give you some pointers about how to interact with me. Like Brandon really likes data. So start talking about data during the meeting, and that'll probably make them light up. Like stuff like that, I think could give us a little nudge to connect a little bit better. Are you seeing anything like that that's possibly going to transform the human relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of similar things and tried a few things actually. So there's a few softwares out there that connect you to meeting people in your organization that you haven't met before, and they connect you either upon common interests that you've both said and submitted to the system, or they connect you for other algorithmic reasons that I don't know. And that could be that you're working on similar projects, or you're in a different country but you're doing a similar role, whatever that might be. And I think some of those things are really effective because, you need to meet people, you need to spend time talking to people, and sometimes you don't know who they are. And I always think back to, post COVID and pre COVID, and I say, well, yeah, the world typically has shifted for white collar work to being remote, and not necessarily remote first, but definitely much more remote and hybrid tendency. But at the same time, everyone said, well, I'm not going to meet anyone new. And then I said, well, who did you meet in the office? And of course, when you go to the office, you typically sit in your same desk every day. You meet your same people, which is your team. You don't bump into anyone else outside of your wider team because actually the marketing team is on the floor upstairs and the finance team is on the floor downstairs. So you just wouldn't be bumping into them anyway. And I had my doubts about how much new people you were meeting. Definitely it's good for connection, don't get me wrong, but I didn't know if you were meeting new people and having more human connection because of that. Whereas with the AI, if you can find a way to hold more meetings and have coffee meetings with people that you necessarily wouldn't bump into, that's a good thing.
One of the other P's that you talked about was predictive insights and decision making. I think this could be a game changer for HR, recruiting, hiring, probably even predicting when turnover might happen. I see a lot of really upsides. I'm sure you do too. I worry though that it might nudge us towards bias or lead us to a decision that has bias behind it. And I know others share that same concern. Like, walk me through that. And do you share the same concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I'm concerned with that the same as you and other people are in the industry. So I think definitely, if you look at retention, for example, or attrition or unforced attrition, you may say, yeah, we can see patterns in people's behavior or patterns in the data that indicate this person may or may not be at risk of leaving the company. And we may or may not want to keep them. So therefore, we may or may not do a specific action and decision. You can see that every time you have one of those may or may not moments in the process, you have a possibility for bias. But I think, at the end of the day, we have that bias within us as an HR function anyway, because the HR business partners, the people in business, are working day in, day out with the people and making those kind of judgment calls. So I would do exactly the same as I do with the technology, with the people. Give them that bias training, make sure people are aware of unconscious bias, make sure we are challenging assumptions. And I think that's the only way we can do it right now. And it's not dissimilar from what we see with humans alone. So it's a risk, but it's a risk that we have to manage, I think.
Totally. Yep. Well, it's well said. One of the other P's that you had was process enhancement. And I think of HR and I think of how many manual processes exist inside of the human resource function. Where do you start with this? I mean, is it as simple as like, let's write a list of all the things that we touch
Yeah.
and then let's start knocking them out? Like, what do you tell organizations?
Yeah, and this is the thing. There's no industry or organization size that's fitting a specific profile right now. It's very dependent upon the company and the legacy they have. So typically, I say to them, okay, let's map all of your processes onto a matrix that says this is easy to tackle, to difficult to tackle, and then something which is saying this is just a foundational part of HR all the way up to a disruptive change. And then based upon what you find in that matrix, you may find some low hanging fruit and you may find some moonshots. And depending again on your risk appetite and your investment appetite, you'll choose what to do. But I would definitely say let's do the low hanging fruit first. So that could be, job matching, CV writing, CV scanning, payroll, administration, chatbots for employee queries. They would typically be the low-hanging fruit, depending on the company. But I think it's something that you really have to leverage because this is an exciting time for HR. If you get rid and reduce your manual processing, you have more time to be strategic. And that's what the business wants and what the business deserves. And that's what people in HR deserve too. So how can we elevate the function from being a transactional processing function to a strategic function? We've talked about that for 5-10 years, but now is an opportunity with the technology to really make it come true.
What if HR is a power user like us? They really want to use these tools, but they're at the mercy of the organization making a decision on, is it okay? Like kind of what we talked about with policy and governance. Whose responsibility is this? Like, is it IT? Is it a COO? Is it the HR? Like, who owns this thing?
I mean, so you can correct me if this is not the right American to use, but this is a trifecta, right? I think this is HR, compliance, and IT all getting together, getting around the table and working through these things. It doesn't work in isolation. I mean, the IT team is probably, anyone's going to come after me for saying this, but the least important in the sense of they're driving technology and they have their agenda. But I would say they need to be the enabler. And then HR and compliance need to put their thinking caps on and say, this is what we want in the organization. So don't just be receiving from the IT team, here's our recommendations, but saying, let's push the boundaries or not, let's find solutions or not, and decide though, but decide as a trio.
Yeah, that's great. Now, let's say the trio, they're like, okay, we got a plan in place. Now we want to put these tools in all of our people's hands. We're going to transform our processes and all that. How do we up level our people with these tools? Are there courses or training, or like us, we're just hands on and we're just playing around with it? What do you suggest as far as like, if we want to up level our whole staff on how to use some of these powerful tools? What's the best approach?
Yeah, I do think that some online training, some webinars, workshops together as a whole team are really, really powerful. And I think you do need to go through that formal training process because the power users will already have gone through the learning curve because they wanted to. They were the ones who were the early adopters. But now you're trying to influence and train the majority of people. They do need something formal. So when I think about AI literacy across an organization, I typically counsel people to do online training, to do webinars, to share knowledge between themselves. A company can set a business challenge for people to experiment with, in a zero risk environment, and just get people playing with the tools. And if you think about the basic use cases of AI in a personal basis, you may put them into two buckets. You might say half of those tasks can be productivity based and efficiency based tasks, and half can be creative tasks. And if you think about creative tasks, what's the number one use case of AI across the world right now? It's writing stories for your children. So you may just tell your employees, go to ChatGPT and start practicing generating in conjunction with the technology a story for a child. Or if you're looking for efficiency, you may say, teach me about something. And you can ask the AI to teach you how to use the AI. And if you're a base level user, you might say, teach it as if I'm a 10-year-old high school student and we're starting from the real basics. And it will do that. So I think there's those two use cases and those two lenses to look through there.
It's good stuff, Dan. I love this conversation. It's been fun geeking out with you and catching up. What did I miss of everything we talked about? What else do you want to cover?
Well, we could go on for hours, I think. And I mean, I guess the only thing I would say is there's a lot of talk in the world about, is AI going to replace jobs?
Right.
And I think we shouldn't be scared of that. We should be painting a brighter future and a brighter vision for society and humanity as a whole. But if you're in the HR function, understanding that AI will change jobs, some will just be, slightly, maybe more efficient, ever so slightly, and that might be, HR help desks using chatbots. But it may be transformational, and it might be, a complete job change, like a manufacturing worker is now not putting the doors on the cars, but is controlling a machine to put the doors on cars. So depending upon the skill level and the amount of transformation, you're going to be dealing with different types of people in different situations, and I think we need to be sensitive to that. So I don't think AI will take the jobs. If I'm wrong, I'm really sorry on that, but I think we need to be sensitive and caring that people will go through quite a big transformation in the coming years, some real changes to their jobs and what they do day to day, and that could be unsettling and unnerving. So we care about people, and we have to help people through that.
Dan, if people want to connect with you, what's the best way to connect or check out your work? Where are you at?
Yeah, my website, www.danielstrode.com, and also Dan Strode on LinkedIn. I'm very active there.
My guest today has been Daniel Strode, returning guest and a good friend now. Dan, thanks for coming on the podcast. Appreciate you.
Thanks a lot, Brandon. I've loved it.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in for today's episode of Transform Your Workplace. The content on this show is strictly for general information and educational purposes only, so that you can go transform your workplace in a positive way. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the show are the guest's own and don't represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of either Xenium HR, the sponsor of the show, or me, the host, Brandon Laws. Additionally, Xenium HR or myself, Brandon Laws, doesn't endorse any guest, their business, or any organization they represent, so discretion is advised. We encourage you to work with a trusted advisor to find a custom approach that fits your organization's needs. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode.